at the Robert H. Jackson Center, Kappa Theater, and it was started in the year 2001. We're now on our 25th anniversary. And our first executive was Dan Bradbury, but only after 6 months he passed away. Shortly thereafter, Raleigh retired from his assembly, private business, and he said, I want to kind of like to get into something. I really enjoy history and still stay active, and he became our executive director. And hence that, given all this newness here and relationships, because we knew we needed assistance from Albany, and his relationship with you, and relationship at the same time with Pat McGee, and then subsequently Kathy, all of that was very much part of the pivotal part of the beginnings of this place. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, at some point, probably Raleigh gave you a call and says, hey, you don't know much about this place, but would you like to know about something? I only can imagine a phone call. I wish you were sitting here so I could ask him. But I'm curious, do you have memories of any of that kind of introduction?
Well, I was trying to think this through after you invited me to come for the interview, because that was 20 years ago anyway, but when I got involved with your project here. And I couldn't clearly remember how it all worked, to tell you the truth. It was kind of like, then I sort of like stepped back on it. And Raleigh and Dave Shepard, who worked for me, they're great friends, you know.
Okay.
Talked to me about the Jackson Center and getting involved in it, and I was a little gun shy, to tell you the truth, at first. And I watched it, and I'm not quite sure why they did this, but the leadership in the Assembly and the Senate decided to create these programs. One was for economic development, the other one was for health care. And I can still remember, Shelley Silver called me, the Speaker of the Assembly, and he said, Bill, you interested in this healthcare money? I think you ought to be interested in economic development. I said, well, you tell me. He said, well, if you take the economic development, I think I could do better for you there than I would in the healthcare, because New York City, all those, they've got all kinds of hospitals, and the legislators are very involved in them and so forth. So, okay, if that's what you think. So this economic development program had to be a capital program.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, that was right up my alley. I very seldom got member items, they call them, inserted into the budget for anybody's salary. Partly because I always thought that if the group couldn't raise the money to pay the help, they probably weren't going to make it anyway. But the big nut to crack was always the capital investment, what they needed for capital. And so over a period of time, I was able to access a considerable amount of money, and at least I thought it was considerable. Probably back, it doesn't sound like much now today after the last few years of inflation, but it seems to me, as I remember, for the Jackson Center, we were able to get about $1.3 million in state funding, and I think it came in 3 tranches. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because
Tremendous memory.
I was trying to put this together.
Because I know that. I mean, I know those aspects, yeah. I'm not sure how that happened, but it happened.
Well, the reason, because I also was able to get state funding for the YWCA rehab, and that was a little over $1 million. I think about $1.2 million, and here it was $1.3 million. But then, and that was something I kind of did without involving the state senate. This is where the money was put together, right?
Right.
But then, down at the JCC, I teamed up with Pat McGee, Senator Pat McGee, to get $1 million between the two of us, 500 from me, 500 from Pat McGee, for the Manufacturing Technology Institute, they call it, MTI. And subsequently, I was able to get them a lot of machinery money. I don't know, probably another, over a period of time, $1 million. And but that's how that money came about. It was kind of at the discretion of the member. You had to pass muster with the state controller, as I remember. But here you had a project that looked like, to me, a good investment for the community. And so that's what we did. And you, I'm sure you had a lot of other sponsors as well. I know you had Carl Kappa was your big founding sponsor.
Betty Lene.
Betty Lene, yeah. And I know Senator McGee got some money for the windows we talked about earlier. That who are the Historic Society or whatever they want us to do.
Well, I mean, I'll pause for a second because I think I'm just going to add this because this is a history lesson too. What I remember about the windows, because there's 130 or 40 windows, and it just leaked like a sieve, and that was one of the reasons the Scottish Rite Consistory got out of business. They just couldn't pay the utility bill, and so we knew we had to handle that. A single pane; these were single pane wooden windows, and at the same time. We had been eligible. I knew this because I'm hustling things all over the place, every direction possible. That we were eligible to become a historically designated building. I mean, the city had done its analysis, and I thought that'd be cool. It's ego to be a state or a national historically designated building. I felt that was good. I was given a lesson under no uncertain terms by Don Blomquist and others, saying that's the worst thing that could happen. Because we got to do a lot of renovation in this building. We need a lot of capital improvement. And if you got a designation, the state agency, becomes very much your best, worst enemy. And so that was one thing. So that stopped. Boom, I have a file, it ended. Boom, do not consider anymore. And then Raleigh was working with Hope's Windows, Frank Farrell. And Frank got a design of a triple pane metal window that would look identical to the wooden pane, single paneled. But it cost a lot of money, like I forget the number, $150,000. And we didn't have the money for that. But, that entered other people to assist us and all that. And Raleigh, in his persuasiveness, convincing Frank Farrell to kind of put this on a delayed payment plan. And, Frank, this is good for you, Frank. And it did. He loved it. And it happened. So the window was a big factor early on because we knew we had to save the building to protect utilities. You're absolutely right. And capital, because this building, the ceiling was falling in. There was a whole lot. So my memory, again, I know you and Raleigh were having the detailed conversation, but there were 3 tranches and 100 or 50, kind of like 50, 50, and 30. I may be guessing, but
I think that's about right. Yeah.
And 30 was the basement. The final piece of the puzzle was the basement, and I know that because we actually had an event. But that would not have happened but for Bill Parment. And I just want to state publicly, there's no one person who gave us more money or made available through member items and other connectiveness than for the Jackson Center than Bill Parment. Nobody. 0. You're number one, numero uno. And so I thank you on behalf of the Jackson Center. I thank you for that.
Well, you got to remember, it wasn't my money; it's the taxpayers' money. But I was the instrument of delivery, I guess.
There's a term in the legal business, the old but-for rule. But for you, we don't get it. So that I appreciate, and I appreciate that with the way your relationship was with the speaker, Sheldon Silver. You were able to get his ear when maybe others would not have been able to get his ear.
Well, that's probably true. And of course, they also knew that they didn't need to fear any kind of scandal at the end of it. Unfortunately, some of the monies that were dispersed from some of these funds that we had wound up in very questionable circumstances. And they knew here, if I said, look, this is an outfit that you can put your money in there and we're not going to have any embarrassment to it, they believe me, and that's true. And I probably, I was thinking about it, the Chautauqua corridor, I'll call it. I had projects going all the way from the South Center Sewer District plant to McCree Point to the 3rd Street Bridge to the Warner Dam to the YW to the Jackson Center down to the Roger Torrey Peterson Center, the Blackstone Wind Tunnel, SKF reheat facility. And there's, people could say, well, we didn't like the project, but no one could ever say there was any hint of scandal in it.
One of the things I remember, and you should take this as a real sense of pride, is when Raleigh and I, we'd have daily conversations, usually at 7 a.m., some crazy idea, and conversations came up, and you'd say, well, maybe I could reach out to Bill Parment. But we also knew that it was never just a phone call saying, Raleigh saying, hey, we would like to have $500,000 for X, Y, and Z, and somehow it happened. We knew that, 1, you had to be convinced, 2, you were making a site visit, 3, you were doing your due diligence, 4, all of that was happening. So we knew that the case had to be made to you, because that's how you worked. That was your MO. And that was an amazing, as a public servant, you are to be credited for that.
Well, that's probably because of my background in public works. And, I worked on some big jobs. I told you, Interstate 84, power line, buildings for the county, roads and bridges. And part of that was to assess, in my mind, whether it was a worthwhile project. And I had kind of a 3 R's, I'd call it. Was it reasonable, responsible, and I forgot the 3rd R. Relative error.
Huh?
In surveying, they call it relative error. If you do a traverse, 15, you go out, you turn an angle, you go 200 feet, you turn an angle, you come back to the beginning, you've created a polygon that should add up to 0 defection, right? Well, it's almost impossible to do even in first-degree surveying, but when you get done, if there's an error, you distribute the error all the way around. It's called relative error. Well, I kind of hype that up to a point of, if it's a $1 million project and they're asking for $10, so what? It's like the relative cost is nothing, right? Now, if it's a $1 million project and it's a $950,000 mistake, that's serious.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not exactly Einstein's theory of relativity, but there's a relative nature to how you assess these things. And when I looked at, 2 cultural institutions here, Robert Jackson Center and the Roger Torrey Peterson Center, my sense was that these had an opportunity for long-term benefit to the community and some economic development value. I would say that both of them were kind of long shots on the economics, but they were cultural additions. And
here we are, I guess 25 years later. Do you have a sense of this? Have you followed us? Have you followed the Jackson Center?
Well, I do because I get your email.
Yeah.
But I think I've been out of town for quite a while. I lived in Ithaca for 10 years, and then the last 4 years I lived in Omaha, Nebraska. And currently we're building a house in North Harmony across the street from where I lived for 36 years. And so I'm back in town. But the time that I've been gone, my only way to kind of follow it, once in a while I would see articles in the paper, or kind of hoped that they'd have some kind of a international cachet or something. But that's what you guys got here. And people are still interested in it. And, you know, last year I wrote a book about the war trials in Japan. It was out, I can't remember the name of the book anymore, but the tribunal there was a military tribunal. And basically Douglas MacArthur was the overseer, I guess. And it had, the book at least, described that as a much less successful endeavor. They had dissension on the court, and it brought out some of the Japanese rationale for having attacked into China and others, the resentment or reaction to Western imperialism is what they were claiming.
Right.
And so, but they had considerable dissension on the board, so it didn't come out to be as prominent as the one. I think I told you earlier. I went to Nuremberg one time when we were traveling, and I went to the courthouse there, or whatever they call it. And it's pretty impressive to go through it. It's kind of like awe-inspiring, you know. It's like history really happened here, and you know, you think about these towering people, figures like Jackson, interviewing Goebbels or
Gehrig,
Hermann Gehrig, and you know, just kind of wow, kind of you know. Of course, I was alive at the time, but it's ancient history to most of us, I guess.
You're a little young. So, you know, here, certainly the first 15, 20 years of our existence, we spent a lot of time on Jackson, the biographical, his legacy, and there were still a few people alive who worked with him, knew him, firsthand knowledge. And we interviewed hundreds of people. That's what I enjoyed doing. And so that's kind of archivally done in here. And with the passage of time, that is no longer an opportunity. But that still doesn't mean that we've had at the Chautauqua annually, all of the chief and prosecutors of all the subsequent tribunals of Rwanda, Cambodia, Sierra Leone, they all come here. So we have this legacy, this international law legacy. And currently this year, under the leadership of our president, Kristen, and program committee, they're monthly doing programs in collaboration with Nuremberg, with the international law, with a variety of universities all year. And if nothing else, while you're back, we'll make sure you get the list. It's quite remarkable.
It'd be interesting for me to dig back into that body of law. I really haven't I haven't spent time reading about international law in a long time. My older son has a degree, a master's degree in comparative and international law. He might be interested.
Yeah. So now that you're back, we now know how to get a hold of you, and I'm sure we'll make sure that maybe we'll get a refresher course with you and Raleigh, and because Raleigh, he'll show up, and the senior members. I don't want to say older members, senior members of our advisory group.
One of the things I was going to, it just sparked in my mind. Former mayor of Jamestown. He worked in the Treasury Department.
Oh, Tracy.
Who?
Sam Tracy.
No. He worked in the Treasury Department in the Roosevelt administration.
Oh.
Why can't I think of his names? Because I'm too old to think names anymore. Move over here on up by the moose. Yeah. Anyway, he told a story about walking through the park one day and seeing Jackson and saying, "Oh, what you up to?" And Jackson said, "Oh, he's working on something for Lend Lease or something." Do you know that story?
I know the story, and I want to attribute it to Bratt, Frank Bratt.
He was a supervisor from Concord.
Yeah. Well, I've heard Raleigh tell the story. And so, yeah, about somebody over in Baker Park. The way the story goes, I've been told that 1940, Jackson was trying to justify, for the benefit of the president, how to do this without the consent of Congress. And that was the game. So you, Mr. Attorney General, you figure it out. You give me the legal justification. And somehow, during that break, he came to back to Jamestown, and was sitting on a bench at Baker Park, by the Prendergast Library.
Yeah.
And somehow, somebody that we're trying to talk about, I remember, saw that. And you're right, that's the story. And anyways, nobody can quite. We've had John Barrett, we've had other guys, trying to. Can you confirm all this? Does anything Jackson ever wrote, anything that's in his files, kind of say that? Because it's a great thing to say. It's a great piece of urban legend that somehow the legal justification for the Lend-Lease ended up being inspired by Robert Jackson sitting on a bench in Baker Park in Jamestown here. I'd like to.
Well, I would be really interested to know the interconnectedness of some of these things. But as Attorney General, I gotta believe that Jackson must have been involved in the Agricultural Adjustments Act of 1936. In the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 36, and all the amendments, and there's still big bodies of law in effect because of that. And he wrote the opinion holding that part of the Agricultural Adjustment Act said that Congress could regulate how much wheat a farmer could grow. I've forgotten the name of the case now. But it was brought out again when Obama wanted to tax people for not being part of Obamacare. And I've always wondered what his involvement was in formulating that policy. I suspect it was probably greater than you might expect.
He clearly was in Washington at that time. The case you're talking about is called Wickland. Wickland. And that was brought up. Everybody assumed that case would be incredibly pivotal when that went before the Supreme Court on the Obama matter. It did not. I mean, they were wondering whether that would be overruled. There was a whole lot of conversation. I remember that conversation. That's all I remember. But you bring up a good point. Where was he? Was he really there at the formulation of the act? Was he there also when the opinion was, obviously he was there when the Wickland case? Where does this all tie in? And the other piece of the puzzle is in Sinclairville, the guy who was intimately involved in the Roosevelt cabinet was Rex Tugwell. Rex Tugwell, who was a Democrat from Sinclairville, whose son, Frank Tugwell, is still alive, and I'm trying to get him here.
Oh.
I like that kind of...
Tugwell, he's the guy who became governor of Puerto Rico. Exactly. One of those trivia questions about Chautauqua County. What Chautauqua County statesman was governor of Puerto Rico?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I have subsequently tracked down, where it's way off course here, but I went to the Library of Congress and did some serious tracking down of a few speeches they have of Tugwell, just to have his voice. He's a Chautauqua County guy, Roosevelt, contemporary of Jackson. And yet over time, just in the dustbin of history, I mean, nobody talks about Tugwell unless you're a true historian.
I forget why he got pushed out of the brain trust. He was a conflict of one of the guys there.
Yeah, that's...
and so he shut him aside and
Senator Puerto Rico?
FDR put him in charge of Puerto Rico.
Which he did great things on. I mean, people in Puerto Rico hold him in high esteem.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Good to know that.
So that 3 or 4 years that he was there, whatever he instituted was really well received. I've done a little bit of research on that, and I want to do an event for no real reason other than to, at least for one day, bring up the name Tugwell.
Yeah.
I did it on Torget. I did it on Bainbridge Colby. I did it on a few of these people who are really big deals for a period of time and soon to be lost.
Well, I always wanted to go look at Dan Reed's papers. I never got around to it. I was in Ithaca. I know there's a Cornell University. And part of the reason is that, and probably Raleigh Kidder's told you the story, his dad grew too much wheat one year. And the federal guys came down and said, you can't use this wheat. So Elliot, Raleigh's father, put it in the bin, kept it, and challenged and lost. And finally Raleigh, sometime later, had to clean out the bin. And because it had gotten moldy, he got rash on his hands. You should ask him about it. But what happened was Raleigh's father, who was a Republican town supervisor, kind tone, went to Dan Reed, who served 44 years in U.S. Congress and was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee during the Eisenhower administration, amended the law because of the protests that Elliot Spitzer made. And I always wanted to go down and see if I could find the letter from Elliot Spitzer to Reed or
Elliot Kidder.
Or Elliot Kidder, yeah. Elliot Spitzer, another guy, another Elliot, Elliot Kidder. I never agreed with that opinion. The Commerce Clause says that Congress can regulate interstate trade. It doesn't say that Congress can regulate how much a farmer's wheat can grow. If they wanted to say that Kansas could only sell 400 million bushels of wheat into the international market or into the interstate market, they could do that. But I don't think they could tell a farmer how much he could grow. I never agreed with that opinion. I was a big fan of Jackson because of his opinion about Pledge of Allegiance, which probably wasn't very popular in most of this county anyway. But I don't think his decision about wheat was very popular in this county either. But I just always, they used to regulate how much oil could go into interstate commerce. They bottled that up for years to keep the price of oil ahead of production costs. They could produce so much oil in Texas and Louisiana that they literally would exceed their production costs, and so they regulated that for a long time, interstate. But they never told any one driller, well, you can't drill. Yeah. It was amount that could be, and of course, my remembrance is a lot of bootlegging of that oil at that time. And so I suppose you'd get bootlegging. But I always kind of wondered about that decision. And I always wondered if you could find some connection between Elliot Kidder and Dan Reed and see what they did. But Raleigh always told me Dan Reed got the law changed.
Well, all of that, that's going to lend itself to a lunch at some point between you, me, and Raleigh. I'll throw the question out and get out of the way. And that's the kind of stuff that, is interesting. I'll also ask John Barrett about the whole AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Act, Jackson's involvement in that, the Wickland, was there, was he, where was he in all of this? Because now you brought up a curiosity because it did come back. I remember when it was this discussion, almost a flashpoint, if you will, when that argument before the Supreme Court. Everybody was starting to talk about Wickland. And I had to read Wickland because I hadn't even read.
Robert struck that tax. I've forgotten why. I just had forgotten to read the pen. Maybe I didn't read the opinion.
Well, he felt it was a taxation. But it was really a fine point. I mean, it was a stretch. It was a stretch. But nevertheless, that's where he got. Oh man, Bill, you're just a fountain of conversation.
Well, I don't get a chance to talk to people very much anymore. It's kind of, me and my wife, and
well, she keeps you on a straight and narrow. Lynn's she's the real deal.
What did I say? 56 years?
Yeah.
I've forgotten. I have to start and count on my fingers anymore. But we've enjoyed ourselves.
Well, we've kind of wrapped this up because I've taken a lot of your time, Bill. But here we are in the Kappa Theater. Is there a sense of your involvement, legacy with the Jackson Center? Here we are now, 25 years. Because of what you did, frankly, we're still existing.
Well, I don't know what I would be able to do for the Jackson Center. I certainly would like to see it thrive. You know, it's always possible that you come up with an idea of something that would be helpful. I just think that what you have to do is kind of keep alive uh, the Nuremberg thing because it has world effect. And, you know, it's one of the, you know, you can't just get everything packaged the way you'd like it. But you know, Jackson obviously was in a situation where he had something that he was required to accomplish, and he did it. And I suspect that to some extent he wasn't completely happy with it. You know, when they had the conference in London, he had to accept the fact that they weren't going to be putting Joe Stalin in the dock, you know. And Joe Stalin killed more people than Hitler. And, you know, we think World War II started in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. No one ever says 2 weeks later, Russia invaded Poland. You know, and if you read Applebaum's book, Bloodlands, in Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, 14 million people died.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we now know that the Katyn Forest massacre, 10,000 Polish officers, was done by the Russian army. In Jackson, who always, it seemed to me, took a practical course to make progress, knew that if they were going to have a trial to try the German war criminals, he just, okay, we have to accept what the reality is. And I think that's kind of a mark of him in a sense of the doable, I guess you'd call it. How would you confront that? I mean, you're at the conference in Russia and our ally Joe Stalin is Joe Stalin. And you know he starved millions of people in Ukraine during the 30s. He purged his army corps, uh, invaded Poland, and yet had to deal with him as an ally.
Sure.
Tough to do.
That kind of, he's hard to categorize, but in one sense, the term pragmatic comes up when you think of Jackson and his policies.
Yeah.
He had to be pragmatic.
Right.
How do we get, what's the means to the end? Not necessarily, is it idyllic, it's just the means.
Well, and I suppose that in that regard, he'd be compared to Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
Holmes's tenure on the court was somewhat like that, although he had some divergences that I probably would find were inexplicable to me. But he basically thought of it as an organic thing that changed with the times and the people, and that was basically what Jackson did too. I think he didn't think it was a straitjacket. I think Raleigh's favorite comment is the Constitution is a suicide pact.
Right. No question, no question. This has been so much fun, Bill. Honest to gosh, and again, on behalf of the Jackson Center, I don't know that we'd be sitting here talking about it. There were obviously many people were players, but at the top of this brew of people who made this a possibility is Bill Parment.
Well, thank you. I hope it continues for a long time, and I see no reason why it wouldn't. I mean, it's got a germ of truth here that can be used for the ages.
Thank you. This has been great.